all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, the Minister not ruling out a deal if it means getting much better access for other farmers into Europe. Well, let's bring in our panel of political strategists this Monday afternoon, Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm not going to get your thoughts on Parmesan cheese necessarily, but let's start with Clive Palmer, shall we? I like the opening line from a piece that Tony Wright in Fairfax Papers has just posted. Clive Palmer's back to remind us that in politics, megalomania never gets old. Grahame, is that what this is? Why is Clive Palmer... Look, it's not just today. We've seen the billboards everywhere. Why is he back?
Well, I'm quite excited about this. Senator Burston is now going to join Clive Palmer. Clive Palmer, when he actually had a party and a few disciples, had an office in the back office near the back door of the National Press Club.
He did.
He could now have a huge party with the T-Rex, the woolly mammoth, the dodo, and any other extinct organisation he wants to think of in that same little office. Look, you know, I've seen phoenixes rise in companies and whatnot,
you don't get
but
this
not in
much
politics.
Chance. Right. Yeah.
And apart from that, you think about this. Senator Burston, I have no idea why he's joining Clive Palmer, except maybe he thinks he can sort of bankroll his sort of campaign. But before he does that, Clive Palmer has to sort out all of those dramas with real people, real workers up in northern Queensland.
Well, he reckons he has. He insists
no, he hasn't.
Black and blue that this is all fine. But you know, clearly not everyone believes him here, Bruce. And for that reason, it seems to me that, you know, while there was fascination with Clive Palmer first time around, it's just not there, surely, this time, is it? He's too damaged.
It's all over for him, and I assume that Burston's in there just because he thinks that he can somehow get some financial advantage in terms of political backing from Palmer, and for no other reason than that. I mean, Palmer is damaged goods. He's got a nephew who's still on the run, I think, and all those issues in Queensland are not resolved at all. So it just, once again, goes to demonstrate what a schmozzle the Senate is these days, with all these minor parties splitting like atoms all over the place. It's just crazy, and I don't think it impresses anybody out there. I think it says a lot also about Pauline Hanson, of course, that this fella couldn't deal with her and that she keeps losing her supporters. So I think Australian electors need to look very hard at these minor parties when they're making their decisions, because they are inherently unstable creations.
Well, look, it's hard to argue against that right now, because, yes, there was a lot of affection and support for minor parties for a number of reasons at the last election. You know, people would agree with the major parties, so, you know, blame the major parties if you will. And it was double dissolution, which helped get them elected. But you look at what's happened. I mean, you go through every week in the last 6 weeks. We've seen... what have we seen? Lucy Gachui sign up from being elected as a family first to then an independent, now with the Liberal Party. Fraser Anning elected as a One Nation, then an independent. Now he's with Bob Katter's party. Steve Martin was elected as a Jackie Lambie network, then an independent, now with the National Party. I mean, I could keep going here. Tim Storer was elected as a Nick Xenophon team, then independent. Now he's set up the Tim Storer party. Brian Burston, One Nation, independent. Now the United Australia Party. Grahame, look, it's hard to keep up, and that's not the comprehensive list. But you know,
it's also a recipe for instability. You know, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the individuals involved, because they're starting to look like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and they are sort of fading towards the exit door. It's not good for the country. It's not good for the Senate. It's terrible. And but you know, it's called democracy. It's
let me ask you a strategic question.
Next time, I hope people really do focus on are we better off with a strong...
And this is what I wanted to ask you, right? Because right now, I mean, the PM needs these, you know, musical chairs, crossbenchers. He was asked flat out today, what do you think of Brian Burston joining up with Clive Palmer? And he was very diplomatic, and, you know, we work with all of them. But come election time, come election time, Grahame, will the major parties, I mean, will the Liberal Party, will the Labor Party say, look, a vote for one of this mob, who knows where they're going to end up? Is that going to be the sort of line that you would suggest should be run?
Very much so. It's sort of the second-tier campaign. You would still be running, the Liberals will still run against campaigns against the Labor Party and vice versa. But there will be, a second-tier campaign which says, look, be very, very careful, particularly in the Senate, where you put your vote and where the preferences for those votes end up, let alone if you vote for this fellow, where he or she is going to end up. You haven't got a clue.
Would you agree, Bruce?
Might end up with Clive Palmer.
That needs to be, at some level, one of the campaign lines from the major parties.
Well, I think it does, but they can't just do that. I mean, the reason that the minor parties are showing some signs of revival in recent years is because there has been a level of disillusionment with both the major parties. And there's been a movement towards populist-style solutions, many of which are fanciful, but nevertheless have a certain appeal when people look at the major parties and say, well, you really are inside the beltway, you're the insiders, you're part of the swamp and so forth. Labor, who I back, I think really have to deal with that group of people who are prepared to abandon them and go to these parties which are inherently unstable and which will leave them high and dry at the end of the day. But in order to do that, they really actually have to engage with those electors and answer a lot of the concerns that they have about the sense of abandonment that they have from the major parties. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah, and look, that remains a problem for the major parties. I mean, I wouldn't write off for a minute the prospects of One Nation in particular in Queensland and, Bob Katter as well. I mean, they clearly still pose a threat despite the shenanigans. Quick one, the GST on tampons. Is three blokes going to dissect this one? But anyway, Grahame, look, it's not a lot of money we're talking about here. What is it, $30-ish million? That would be lost to the budget and it does seem an anomaly when the GST does not apply to all these things like Viagra and condoms and whatnot. The Senate today passed a motion, doesn't mean much, but the Senate passed a motion saying the GST should be removed from tampons. Should the government do something about this?
Well, look, this campaign's being run by Tanya Plibersek. I used to think she wasn't stupid. All she had to do was to have a talk to her state colleagues in the Northern Territory, in where else are they?
Queensland.
WA.
I think they're all on board, though, the Labor states.
That toy parliament in the ACT.
Yeah. Well, I think they're all on board, the Labor states. It's the Liberal states that are standing in the way.
Well, all they've got to do is put up their hand, have a meeting at a COAG-type meeting with all the treasurers and get everyone on board. It's nothing to do with poor old, Scott Morrison or Malcolm Turnbull. It's the states that can change it. And the other thing, once you start saying gender-specific changes, then how far do you go? I find it uncomfortable that the GST is there, but once you open up gender-specific things, there's a lot of things. What about blokes' ties, razor blades? All of a sudden, silly things start being opened because there's a break in the system. I find it uncomfortable that there's a GST on tampons.
I guess the difference
there are a lot of things you wouldn't want it on.
I guess the difference there is you don't have to buy a tie and you don't have to have a shave. This, Bruce, isn't really...
you know what I mean.
An option. Well, I don't know. Bruce, what do you think?
Well, I think we should just go ahead and abolish it, frankly, and I think that would be a politically sensible thing to do as well. It is a discriminatory tax in that sense. And for a long time, a lot of women have been agitating on this issue. I think it's time just to say,
it's not a lot of money.
OK, it's not a lot of money. Let's just sort this thing out now. And, I don't think the democracy is going to come crumbling down around us or the tax system because we've decided to sort out a few issues on behalf of women.
Extend the GST to all these other things that it frankly should apply to if we're going to apply that rule. Anyway, we're not going to solve it right here. Bruce, Grahame, good to talk to you both. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick break and back with the last word.